welcome to another Geography 2050 session, this time on empowering communities with data-driven insights. My name is Arturo Franco. I'm a Senior Vice President at the MasterCard Center for Inclusive Growth. And today I have the honor to engage in conversation with Dr. Michelle Thompson, Associate Professor at the University of New Orleans in the Department of Planning and Urban Studies, and a Senior Data Fellow with us at the center. Michelle, it's great to have you. Welcome.
Thank you, Arturo.
And as you know, for the last few years, the Center for Inclusive Growth has been engaging with communities all around the country and abroad in conversations about how to achieve a more inclusive economic development. We do this on a philanthropic basis using our data insights and our analytics, because we strongly believe that while driving economic growth is very important for communities and for cities, it will only be sustainable if that growth is truly inclusive. And so part of this effort involves working with experts such as Dr. Thompson and trying to uncover insights around geographic inequities. And so to begin the conversation today, to kick it off, I'd like to share a brief video that shows just one of the ways that we are engaging with communities.
The world is made up of communities. Every neighborhood has a story, and those memories are still alive in the community. I grew up in the 7th Ward of New Orleans, this area of the city that is now known as the Claiborne Corridor. This was a neighborhood of wonder and excitement, of cultural traditions, of family gatherings. And then residents talk about the monster. When the interstate was built in 1967 through eminent domain, we lost 326 Black-owned businesses. We lost intergenerational wealth, opportunities to invest in our own neighborhoods. Claiborne Avenue went from being one of the most successful business districts in the southeastern United States to being the least successful business district in the city of New Orleans. But the vibrancy is coming back to the street. And I believe that the data insights will help us to grow that and to formalize it in a way that helps this to become a destination.
As a data fellow for the MasterCard Center for Inclusive Growth, my job has been to try to develop a new way for data to be used by the Claiborne community to see if they can encourage investment. The Claiborne Innovation District is just a 19-block area within the livable Claiborne corridor. There's literally hundreds and thousands of people on a daily basis driving over the Claiborne Innovation District. What they don't know is on the ground, there's a vibrant neighborhood that's growing, and it's going to continue to grow. But they needed the information to show that people are rebuilding in the neighborhood, and that's what we're providing. An important part of the work that we're doing right now is to try to make sure that we get different types of data that will help explain the buying power in the neighborhood. There's municipal data, community data, and anonymized and aggregated spending data. So for the community data, we physically walk out into the neighborhood, we take our clipboard, and we'll make a map of the property conditions. And putting those all together will give a clearer picture on what the buying power is of a neighborhood.
Full strategy of place-based development. Yes. It's what I'm saying. I think that's what it is. Well, and you know why this is so
138% increase in consumer spending. I mean, that's beyond our wildest dreams. Every bit of information you have amplifies the success of residents being given control of their own community. So that is the power of the data. That is the power of knowing. We still have a lot of work to do on Claiborne, but the data insights were an amazing catalyst for our community, because now when I walk down Claiborne, I can see the businesses starting to fill in.
What's wonderful about this particular neighborhood is when you look up and see that bridge, even though there's a lot of people passing you by, you can see the city and you can see growth. It's going from hopeless to hope.
Oh, Michelle, this is a very powerful story. Unfortunately, a story that plays out beyond New Orleans. It's a story of many cities in America, in the United States. Why don't we start by you taking us back to 2019 when you worked in the Claiborne Corridor project? Tell us, how did this analysis, how did the data insights that we can see on the screen uh, made their way to decision makers on the ground? What was their understanding? What were they looking for in the data? And what was the reaction of the community on the ground?
Great. Thanks again, Arturo. I'm really excited to be part of the Geography 2050. But before we really talk about the work that really has made a difference with the local community leaders and with the city in terms of those MasterCard data insights, I need to go back a little bit further as to kind of why this work was being done. You know, even though it was 2005, Hurricane Katrina still lives with the city in many different ways. And what happened around 2007, there was the city of New Orleans decided to designate the corridor that really had historically had most disinvestment, and then it was hit by the hurricane. And so that Claiborne corridor, which really does extend from one end of the city to the other, they really shortened it into this livable Claiborne communities area where they were expecting FEMA dollars and housing urban development dollars to really help with recovery. But that was definitely not going to be enough. And they also wanted to figure out what was working. So the students at the University of New Orleans and the faculty have always been, especially since 2005, kind of evaluating what are the policies, what are the practices, what's worked, what hasn't. And as part of that work, in 2018, that's jumping a few years, but I started working with students in my classes. And in the first half of the semester, they would learn geographic information systems or computer mapping, painfully so. And then in the second half, we had a great opportunity to say, how can we use this technology to collect data that communities need and want? And so we met up with folks from the Claiborne Innovation District, and that's that 19 block area that was spoke about in the video. And the idea first was, after there had been some talk about bringing down Interstate 10, and as you mentioned, this is an issue that's across the country. There are a lot of highways that cut through wonderful, vibrant sections of cities, and then they were decimated. And then the idea is now, how do we either take down those bridges or how do we live with the bridge and work under them? So that's what that CID analysis was about, is can we come up with new ideas? What's the spending patterns now? So essentially what happened was we did an analysis of the property conditions, the values of the property, to bring it forth to the emerging business association. That was the core of the project. Can we bring data, maps, and analysis so that they can go forward and get monies from foundations or develop a main street? But we knew that there was a piece that was missing. It's how do we actually show that businesses are growing and thriving? How do we show that there really is, in this area that they consider really highly risk, that there's a lot of growing businesses and buying power? So as you can see from this livable Claiborne corridor visual, one of the opportunities to work with the MasterCard Center was to try to get access to that MasterCard anonymized and aggregated data, which, as you know, was a feat. And the idea of trying to take private data, bring it to the public, and to make sure that it's used in a way that it was intended was challenging. But thank goodness for attorneys and the will of yourself as well to really have faith that we can go forward to bring the data back. And as in this video with the livable Claiborne corridor, we were able to see In 2015, 175 businesses, new businesses grew. 2016, 189, 2017, 235, 2018, 337. And then as we began going forward in our study, we weren't yet hit with COVID-19. We certainly were still hit with a lot of economic injustice, still lack of investment. But there was an idea through the qualified opportunity zones that maybe if this information about the business growth, about this corridor, that investors might take a second look. So I think that in answer to the question, the connection with the community, the long-term monitoring, and really that cherry on the top was the MasterCard data that was given back to the community to tell their own story.
Michelle, we know that then COVID happened in 2020, but let me stay in 2019. I remember you and I having a lot of conversations about what the best way to present this data was, because what we wanted to do was not just measure performance or past performance. We wanted to actually measure potential. We wanted to measure the opportunity of growth, and particularly of a more inclusive growth in New Orleans. Tell us, what did you do once you had the analysis in your hands? Who did you engage with? Where did you present it? How was it received by decision makers?
Well, the most important part of this, because again, my hat shifted from the university part to really as a senior data fellow. What made the difference is that I think we had that connection between that public university and the goal of being that community data organizer. That's what that role was, to then being able to sit with and in the MasterCard Center to share that information. And I think there was incredible excitement when I started talking to the local planning department and the New Orleans Business Alliance, because they at the same time were trying to get the same type of data to say, we know that citywide, there's a lot of growth, but in this particular corridor, we still don't have the ability, don't have the money, and don't have the time to be able to do this kind of analysis. So we took it not only to, like I said, the city fathers, we also were able to take it to the academic community, because this is a brand new way of doing business. Even though there's a lot in terms of community engagement, still we teach top-down planning, and this particular experiment, which we now call Public and Private Participation Geographic Information Systems, or P3GIS, wasn't yet truly proven or tested. That's what this particular project did. And then I'm going to say, not as an afterthought, but really what Assali Ecclesiastes said is it was brought to the community. And as a result, they were able to get additional funding from a very substantial funding to expand and actually create an economic development community organization. So there were multiple ways in which this project kind of met the needs, and not from our design, but from the community's desire.
We completely learned in that experience that involving the community from the very beginning was the right way of doing it. And that if communities have better ingredients, in this case data, insights, reliable and recent data, they can get better outcomes. Then we loved the experience so much, Michelle, that we moved to a different city. We went to Chicago with you in the start of 2020. Little did we know that it was going to be a year that would go down in history for other reasons. But tell us about that project. What was the research question in Chicago? You mentioned opportunity zones. They were at the time, and perhaps still seen as one of the most exciting opportunities in the economic development toolkit. So how did this work come about, and how did it shift or evolve during the pandemic?
So what was great about being able to do this project was a couple things were relatively stable. Certainly was the MasterCard Center, but the ability for MasterCard to have a lot of wonderful volunteers on the New Orleans project. We had 60 data scientists for MasterCard look at over 3 years of data. And I still think it's phenomenal to think of every transaction of every day, of every hour, to look and try to figure out what is this data trying to tell us. In Chicago, we really did try to replicate the model, P3GIS, but also to be able to say, how can we again engage community, bring in the university or those technologists, and make sure that what we're developing is useful and has value to the local community leaders and policymakers. So we had great intentions in January of 2020. And we got a group together. We were able to meet with the City Planning Commission and Maurice Cox and his team, and who were already having monthly meetings with the Invest Southwest community areas. And as you can see from the map, those neighborhoods where some of them were actually, again, aggregated by the city because they wanted those to be their new investment areas, again, with HUD, with all types of resources. And as you mentioned, qualified opportunity zones. The city of Chicago had come up with a really wonderful play to share their playbook out into the community to say, what is it that the community wants? Arts, businesses, integrated schools. So they didn't wait for investors to come. They already had what they were seeking, but there still was another gap. It's like, so yes, you have these wonderful neighborhoods, but are they worth investing in? And I think that's when we came along and said, we are going to be able to show some changes over time. And then March hit. So March is when we had the shutdown. And that's when we had to really, the word of the day is pivot, and try to figure out, how can we do a project when we don't directly have access to businesses who are now really, some of them shutting down, some of them, just trying to figure out how to continue. And we have a city really in shock. We are trying to figure out how can we engage them and provide them with a way. So we had to use other local advocates like the New America Chicago team, who had been in touch with the business community. I think these are important points that I'm saying. It's like, I know folks are focused so much on the data, but it is the relationships that you have to have before any of this can work. And then we were able to get together by August of 2020, a wonderful group, again, of volunteers from MasterCard to analyze the data. And the other chart, when it shows on the spend growth, I think for those folks who are, again, in the planning or in the practicing profession, this is the kind of data that makes us happy. We're able to see over time, even down to the month, and if we wanted to, or if you had allowed me to, Arturo, over a weekly basis, the spend, there's too much data to analyze. But to overlay that with what's happening over time, and to be able to really support the notion that lockdown, as you can see, there's a significant decline in spending citywide, but specifically in the areas who really needed more access to grocery stores, more resources. So I think what's great about the data that was brought forth is we were able to then combine different levels of geography, citywide, neighborhood, street. Also, when there was civic unrest because of the protests, we're able to actually connect directly, almost real time, on what it is that the city wants to see, how they can use this information, and to show that there were real challenges. But the chart also shows that as things opened up, the mask mandate happened, businesses came forward, the data was able to really show and amplify what was going on. And honestly, that just wasn't available before.
I remember, Michelle, when we were looking at New Orleans, we were thinking obviously in time frames of years, because the construction of that highway, while it is what I consider a man-made disaster, right? It worked in a time frame of years of decline, and followed by years of recovery from that district. When we were doing this project, as you said, the time frame of change was reduced to a weekly time frame. You had a lockdown, you had a reopening, you had George Floyd and social unrest, and we were able to quickly pivot to try to produce these insights, again from our aggregated and anonymized transaction data, to support the decision making in the city. What did you learn about Chicago from an inequality perspective when you looked at the different areas, some of them opportunity zones, some of them just communities that were underserved for many years? What was your sense of what you found in Chicago from a geographic inequity perspective?
Yeah, I think that was not something that we intentionally were looking for, because we were already looking at neighborhoods that had long-term investments. We're talking about pre-60s, and there was redlining, and there was all kinds of issues. So it wasn't until we started looking more closely at the data, and we're trying to see not only what are the spending patterns, and I think for some folks, when we keep talking about spending patterns, what does it really mean? How many shoes do you buy? How much gas do you purchase? Where do you do your shopping? And what amount? And even though we don't know where the person lives who swipes their card, or we don't know any information about them, but we did find out, which was fascinating, that in the neighborhoods where you kind of know by rule of thumb, that heuristic, that those neighborhoods don't have typically your high end, your good grocery stores. I don't want to name a name. So that's why I was hesitating, but it just definitely, there are limitations on full service grocery stores. There are a lot of gasoline grocery stores. There are a lot of places that folks have to buy, maybe even from some temporary markets. But I thought, what was really fascinating was to see, and what we were able to look at is the direction of spend. That in these neighborhoods where we already know there's buying power, the money is actually going out of the neighborhood. And we were able to do that analysis. And that was one of the insights that was really, I'm excited to say, I'm excited about it because it really does show that the money could be brought back in if those resources were there. That is why that information would be very helpful for investors. And for Chicago, they were able to use the information because they had weekly meetings with the community to say, we now have some information that you can share with your investors. And I think that in terms of the way in which we are thinking about urban areas, that folks want to move back into cities, and the G word comes up, gentrification, because folks want to be able to walk to their local grocery store and to their bank and to their health clinic within 15 minutes. But there's a higher cost to being poor, because those folks who are living in areas where they may not necessarily have cars, are riding transit, have to go outside of their neighborhoods. That kind of information was really helpful to me to be able to formulate a better sense of saying, this is why leakage, this is how what leakage looks like in terms of the numbers, but this is why it's really important to invest in the community. Not just the money's there, but why it's important.
And we learned that sometimes the places are poor instead of the people being poor. And so to that point, Michelle, you said earlier that this kind of graph or this kind of data makes city planners, policymakers, local leaders, investors happy because they have access to information that allows them to make better decisions. In 2019, as you will remember, we started thinking about, how can we make it possible for more communities, more cities, more people to be able to do this kind of analysis without having to deploy you or your team or a team of MasterCard data scientists to the city. And what we came up with was a public open source tool called the Inclusive Growth Score. The Inclusive Growth Score is available since 2019. It has 5 years of data for each of the more than 70,000 census tracts in the United States. That's more than 6 million individual data points. And what it tries to do is to provide a clear and simple view of social and economic development, including proprietary data from MasterCard, aggregated and anonymized spending data, but also public data. And so we launched this in 2019, believing that with the power of this data in their hands, communities could uncover trends and insights or benchmark themselves against others. The tool allows you to rank each census tract in each one of the 18 measures of what we call inclusive growth. And it also allows you to track changes over time. And so this has been just one of the ways in which we are trying to make decisions better. I think if you fundamentally care about inclusive growth, you want to understand how different policies or different actions are impacting each of the neighborhoods where people live on the ground. And so this tool allows us to create unique profiles for each census tract. We are very excited about the growth of this tool, and we've gotten a lot of feedback from communities, from CDFIs, community banks, all kinds of organizations that are using it. And one example of how we've been able to apply the Inclusive Growth Score is in the work that we've been doing with the city of St. Louis as part of our Inclusive Growth dialogue series there with Washington University in Missouri in St. Louis, and with their Social Policy Institute. And here we actually focused on the inequality that you can clearly see in the city, and trying to understand some of the trends and also analyze the impacts of particular policies, including opportunity zones. What you see on the screen is the change in the Inclusive Growth Score of some of the opportunity zones in downtown St. Louis over the past 5 years. And so I think with this, Michelle, I would just like to go back to a phrase that I read before we started this whole place-based economic development work by David Brooks in the New York Times, where he was writing about community, but writing about how the neighborhood as a unit of analysis, as a unit of change, was important. It might be, he said, that the neighborhood is the essential unit, and we might want to think of policy or think of investment or think of change at the neighborhood level. So just wanted to ask you a final question, which is, as you look at this experiences, 3 experiences, because you also helped us put together the Inclusive Growth Score. As you look at the work that you have ahead, how are you approaching geographic inequities, GIS work, in a different way after this experience?
Oh, thanks, Arturo. Well, I mean, first and foremost, I think I have a greater appreciation for what it takes to truly figure out how to make data for good. I know it's been a tagline, but I think that the idea that I really thought that that first project was just going to be a case study for New Orleans. And then we went forward to look at Chicago, and it became something where we know we can apply this kind of work locally, nationally, and internationally. But for me personally, I was able to take the IGS tool and bring it back to my students. That's what I think, that that quote is wonderful, but it's also the folks who are coming behind us or beside us who are going to have to take the IGS further and understand it and implement it. The fact that it's there is really important, because I think that's what's underneath all of these projects is we really want to do no harm. We really want to come in and make sure we leave the place a bit better. And Arturo, truly, I know it was a monumental effort to get the IGS moving and growing, and you made that happen. And now it's international. So I think that there, it's not going to stop. It's going to continue. And I think that's what I'm hoping, that beyond this experience, that others can take it forward, because it is about the neighborhood, but it's all about all of us.
Thank you, Michelle. And with that, I hope, just like your students are doing and my students at the University of Toronto, that we invite other people to explore the tool, Inclusive Growth Score, to look at the work that you've done, which is amazing, to continue to give us feedback so that we can improve what we do, and to hopefully join us in an effort which is urgent at this point in time, to make our economy truly work for everyone, everywhere, and having data insights about geography is a big part of that. So thank you, Michelle. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, and great to see you.
Same, Arturo. Be well.
You too.